Today I want to explain the way a manual transmission works. So when you start the car, the engine is usually running, but it's usually running at the slowest rate, which is usually called idle. And for most cars, the idle is usually around 800 revolutions per minute. When you look at the dashboard, there is a gauge for the engine revolutions per minute, which is usually called the RPM. And when you look at that gauge, it's usually written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. Then it's written times 1000. So basically, if your gauge is indicating 2, for example, then it means the actual reading is 2 times 1000, which is 2000 revolutions per minute. But when the car is not running or the car is not moving, then the idle for most cars is usually around 800 revolutions per minute. So when you also look at the pedals for a manual car has 3 pedals. The pedal to your extreme right is the accelerator, which is basically used to increase the speed for the car. The pedal in the middle is the brake pedal, and is usually used for either reducing the speed or stopping the car. Then the pedal on your extreme left is the clutch, and I can describe the clutch as a gate. Okay, I will explain that a little bit later. So there's something I would like you guys to understand. The power in a car comes from the engine, but you see the engine is connected all the way through the clutch, through the transmission, through the drive shaft to the wheels. I'm imagining now I'm talking about a rear drive car, for example. When you look at the car, the arrangement of the parts, you have the engine, you have the clutch, you have the transmission, then there is a drive shaft. When you look at the underside of a vehicle, you will see a metal rod which usually spins when the car is moving. That is what is called a drive shaft. So power moves from the engine through the clutch, through the transmission, then the drive shaft all the way to the wheels. So when the engine is running, the car has to be running if the system is connected, and that is why now you need to have the clutch, so that now you can disconnect when you want the engine to be running but the vehicle is not moving. Okay, so that is why anytime the engine is running and you are not moving, the vehicle has to be, you have to be pressing either the clutch or you have to be in neutral gear, because also a neutral gear basically means that there is no gear that is engaged. Come to the transmission. The transmission basically is made up of a set of gears, and one side of the gears is connected to what is called the input shaft, and the other set of gears is connected to the output shaft. So when the engine is running now and you have engaged the gears, so the input shaft usually turns the input gears, and depending on the ratio of the input and the output gears, you can either have power or you can have speed. So for example, when you are in gear number 1, the input gear is usually smaller than the output gear, and so what happens, this input gear has to turn several times for the output gear to turn once, and in such a scenario now you end up getting more power and less speed. So these gears, the smaller gears like number 1, number 2, they are used to give more power, and generally they are used when you are either starting the vehicle or when you are climbing uphill. So As you also increase the speed, now you also increase the gears, like number 3, number 4, number 5, like that. So when you are also going uphill, like if you are in number 5 for example, you might start feeling now the car is losing power. And if you listen to the sound of the engine, you can actually feel the car is losing power because it is sounding more, but it's not moving at the speed it was moving at. So now that indicates that the car is losing power and you need to engage a lower gear. So you can actually lower the gears sequentially, or you can skip the gears if you know how the gears work. So what happens when now you are driving the car? So basically when you start the car, the engine is running at a rate called the idle, and at that particular rate the engine doesn't have that much power. So now the engine is running, so you press in the clutch and then you select gear number 1 or number 2, because as I had said earlier, number 1 and number 2 have the most power, and when you are starting off a car you need more power and less speed. So you either select number 1 or number 2, and then you give the car or the engine some little bit of gas by pressing the accelerator, and you will see now the RPM now will rise up to, will start rising. So basically you need to press the accelerator until now the RPM rises up to between 1500 and 2000 revolutions per minute. So that means basically you are increasing the power of the engine. And then now you start releasing the clutch slowly by slowly until you start feeling now the car vibrating. At that particular point we call it the biting point. And basically what is happening now, the clutch and the transmission, the engine and the transmission now are coming into contact. So now if you hold the clutch right there, you will start seeing now the car will start rolling forward if you had selected a forward gear. Okay, so now when the car picks up some little bit more speed, now you can release the rest of the clutch. Yeah, and if the car now demands more speed, you need to shift it into higher gears, like number 3, number 4, number 5, like that. But every time you need to shift the gear, you need to first of all press the clutch, then select the gear, and then you release the clutch, just like that. So there's something that I would like you to understand here. The speed that you're driving in is actually a result of two things which multiply, which is now the RPM, which is the speed of the engine, and the gear ratio that you are in. So for lower gears, actually the ratio is usually very low, below 1. Okay, so when you put the car, for example, in gear number 1, and then you give it more fuel by pressing the accelerator, you will notice that the vehicle will not go past a certain speed, like around 50 kilometers per hour. Why? Because now the gear ratio is too low. So even if you give it too much power, it cannot go beyond that speed. So the more you want more speed, you have also to increase the gears. There is also another scenario now. Assume now you are in a low speed, but you are in a higher gear, like number 5 for example, and you are driving at 30 kilometers per hour. If you continue reducing the speed, it means now the RPM has to be so low for you to get that speed at a higher gear ratio. I told you now the speed you are in is an effect of the RPM and the gear ratio. That is what gives you the speed. So if the speed is too low and the gear ratio is too high, then it means the RPM has to be too low for you to be able to move at that speed. And remember now I had mentioned about something called the idle. The idle is the lowest speed which the vehicle is supposed to, the engine is supposed to run. Otherwise, if it goes below that rate, then it goes off. So now when you're moving in a higher gear and a lower speed, you are making the RPM to go sometimes even below the idle, and if it goes below idle now, the engine goes off or you stall the vehicle. So as you slow the car or as you slow the speeds, you are also supposed to reduce the gears.